Well, thank you so much. Especially thank you to IPI and also to Concordia for this research or this paper that we have at the end. I'm particularly proud, really, to be here for two reasons. The first one is that the origin of this research, it was the event that we organized last year in this place, where we have a discussion about how to engage the private sector in the implementation of the SDGs, and we open a conversation specifically on Goal 16. So I'm really happy to see that as a result of the whole process, we have now a paper with an important research with companies from the private sector, and also with some inputs from the UN and also from the local governments. And the second reason is because in the SDG Fund, we are trying really to promote as one of the priorities public and private partnerships, because the main idea in the fund is really put together all the actors and try really to improve the efficiency of the resources, mainly thinking in this idea, which is really to improve the life of the people in need. So in order to do so, I'm really, happy to see that many of the conclusions of the report perfectly fit in the work that we are already doing in the implementation of the SDGs, working in the field. But keeping one thing in mind, I think that partnerships means also responsibilities. And I think that I would like to highlight especially two. The first is how to integrate the SDGs in the core business of the companies, especially we are talking about the private sector. And the second one is also to find new ways for financing and new projects and try, as I mentioned, to improve the life of the people. So just very brief to say that the methodology that we are using in the SDG Fund is just to work with the so-called joint programs, meaning that we are working with at least 3 agencies of the UN in the field, but also at the same time using the matching funds, meaning that if I give you $1, you have to find an additional $1 from local actors or from international actors working locally. And with that, we multiply by 2 the original budget that we have for the programs, meaning that at the end of this year, we are implementing 100 million, which is nothing compared with the needs that we have in the world, but at least it's a small seed just to start with this work. So I think that it's important to underline just 4 of the main conclusions that I think that we have in the report, and I think that are really important ones. So the first one is that other SDGs lead to SDG 16. I mean, the 2030 agenda clarified perfectly the goals, but I think that goal 16 is not only a goal in itself. I think that the consequences of that are the impact in other SDGs, at least from the reports that we are receiving now, the evaluation reports of our projects in the field. Now we have the confirmation that even if we started working on 3 areas, on food security and nutrition, access to water and sanitation, and inclusive economic growth, even if we started in these 3 specific areas, the impact is really in the 17 goals. And I think that this is, we have now the evidence that this, this is a reality, meaning that even if the focus of the research is mainly in goal 16, the impact in the rest of the SDGs, I think that is also important. The second point is really to integrate small and medium business in global distribution chains. I think that when we started all the discussions about how to engage with the private sector, it's clear that every region, every country, and every company have a completely different approach about how to implement the goals. Last year, we organized different workshops in the 5 regions of the UN with companies from the 5 regions, and it was really a very interesting exercise to see the different challenges. I remember that in Nigeria, where we have one of the workshops, the condition was to have somebody from the government in the workshop working with the private sector. in the US, the condition was not have anybody from the government working with the private sector. So, I mean, and of course it's completely different to see the challenges for a company with 5 workers or with 5,000 workers, meaning that, of course, we need also to talk about how to engage the private sector, keeping in mind that the private sector is not only one homogeneous actor. I think that it's important to keep in mind the different approaches from different sizes, different sectors, and of course different regions. And this is important because I think that the first step that here in the UN we use is just to focus on big corporations that of course are important, but we need also to work with a small business and medium business, trying to engage all, not because we want the private sector only as a donor, but just because we want to have a real actor working with us. And it means that we need to find the ways to co-design and co-implement the work with the private sector. It doesn't matter if it's medium, small, or a big corporation. The third point is that in the report, I think that it confirms the work that we are trying to do in order to integrate all SDGs into the core activities of the companies. So I think that, I mean, of course, it's important really to work with the private sector, but I think that with the private sector, there are 2 ways to work. One is the implementation of the agenda, as I mentioned, and try to see how the private sector can be engaged, not only, I repeat, focus on Goal 16, but in many others that contribute to the achievement of Goal 16. But also there is another thing, which is how to integrate the SDGs in the core business of the companies, because sometimes really is the way also to improve the life of the people. I remember that last year with one of the companies that we have in our private sector advisory group was that they decided, it's a very big company, I'm not going to say the names, no worries, but they decided to use funds in all the factories that they have in 2 developing countries. So, you know, only with the use of the funds, they improve a lot the work of the people in the places. So I think that sometimes is also to see how to integrate that in the core business of the company. And then the last one is leveraging resources and, of course, try to see how to share the risks, because there are risks, of course, but the point is to see, I mean, how to bridge the gap between the private sector and efforts to build and sustain peace in this case. And I think that there is a specific need really to incentivize private investments in countries where capital is most needed. So I think that these are the 4 main conclusions that I see that are completely in the line of the work that we are trying to do. And I think that, I mean, we have examples where really this approach is useful and is working. I'm thinking in the programs that we have, for instance, now in Colombia or in Sierra Leone or in Sri Lanka, where we already have evidences and data about the impact of the work of the private sector, even if it's mainly focused on the 16 goal, but also about the impact of this work in other goals, for instance, on food security and nutrition. So I think that, you know, there are many ways to work, but I think that it's a challenge, try to see how to engage the private sector. We have now the confirmation that it's feasible. We can really have an impact. We can improve the life of the people, which is the most important thing, as I say. And I think that, I mean, this type of research contribute to the work that all of us are trying to do. So I really don't want to finish really just without say thank you in this public setting, especially to Jimena from IPI and also Ekaterina, that I suppose that is around from the SDG Fund, and also the team from Concordia that really contribute to have the research here today. And of course, I don't want to finish just to invite all of you to the launching of the private sector advisory group report of the SDG fund that will be also focused on goal 16 and private sector from another angle. That will be here in New York the 3rd of November. So all of you will be more than welcome, and thank you to the teams in IPI, in Concordia, and of course in the SDGF that are all of them there in the back. So thank you so much for the work done. Thank you.